Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to the first meeting of the Housing Planning and Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee for 2018. You're all very welcome, and particularly our subs who are here today. I have got apologies from Councillor Robert Sharp, Councillor Lynn Holland, Julie Connor and Dr John Lamont. We might do a little bit of jigging about with the agenda today just because of the availability of some of our speakers, so hopefully members will bear with us while we move things around on the agenda slightly. Do we have any urgent business? No. None. And does any member have a declaration of interest for any of the items on the agenda? No. Are members content to receive and approve the minutes of the last meeting from December? They're agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, what I'm going to take next is the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework update, which is item number 5. I'll remind members that we've got a substantive item on this at our next meeting. I would welcome any questions from any members on the report that Anne has provided for us, but I would like to remind everybody that we are going to spend some time digging into this in a little bit more detail next time. Anne, do you want to present or introduce your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This is a brief update. It's updating sort of a similar report that you've had a couple of times, and there are 2 or 3 things that I just would like to bring to your attention. First of all, when we're talking about the evidence base, we're doing a lot of work around land supply, which obviously will be of interest to you all. You will know that your local authority and all 10 local authorities publish their brownfield registers by the end of December. They're all on your websites, but they're also on the Mapping GM website, so we can see the totality of the brownfield registers. But they are but a subset of the overall urban land supply, because that includes the brownfield registers are only registers where development may happen in the next 5 years, and there is some brownfield land that may take longer to come forward. There's also some greenfield land in the urban area. So what we're looking to do at the end of this month and be part of the substantive item in February is publish what we think is our complete urban land supply for you all to have a look at and see if we've missed anything out. This has come from work that districts are doing. It's not just from our work, but that I think is going to be quite a significant milestone, and that's what we're hoping to bring to you at the next meeting. I also just wanted to raise the issue of the review of the National Planning Policy Framework. This was highlighted in the Housing White Paper and also in the Local Housing Needs Consultation. We have no time scale for that yet, but it is expected possibly in the next couple of months. Any of you who work in planning at a local authority level will know that the National Planning Policy Framework is quite a significant document and possibly the bane of some of your lives. I think it's quite an important document for us to be looking at to see what the Greater Manchester response to a review may be. There are a lot of issues, particularly perhaps around 5-year supply, that we might want to get into. So it was just to highlight that's coming out. We don't know when. There will be a consultation. We'll bring that back to you as soon as we can, but I think it's something we probably want as a committee and also within your authorities to be involved with.
Thank you. Does any member of the committee have any questions for Anne at this stage? Councillor Sherrington.
Sorry, Lord Chair. Thank you. All it is, it's just about the mailing that's got it down as being for about 10,000 people to be emailed about things to do with the framework. I'm just a bit worried if you page 20, sorry, at the top, item 2, yeah, 2.3.5. Yeah, it's just it says that to keep people informed of the developments. I just think with something as large as Greater Manchester, I just think that 10,000 is probably a bit on the small side, and I'm just wondering how we would actually get more people interested, involved or whatever, so that they could go out to a wider amount of people. Okay, thank you.
Rachel, can you come to the table? Sorry, because we've got microphones. You're very welcome. We'll give you a sec to find a spare microphone to come and illuminate us all. And I suppose one of the points I'd like to make as well, adding to that is the first round of the GMSF, it felt quite a lot like it was something being talked about being done to communities, not by communities or with communities. And I really hope that in the next phase, when it comes out, I think June, we've talked about it's being published in June, it's much more the comms are done with communities and in discussion with communities. Also thinking about what's in it for communities and explaining why, in the view of the combined authority, this is better than the alternative. And I think that was something that I didn't see as much as I would have liked to in the last phase.
The 10,000 figure quoted in the paper, that's basically the details that we have from the respondents from last time that replied via email. So these are people that we know that are actively engaged in wanting to find out more information. This isn't an exclusive e-bulletin to those 10,000 people. If more people want to receive it, then they can do. It's literally just our starting point because those are the people that have previously responded. So a good guess is that they're probably the ones that will likely to respond next year as well. In terms of other activity, we're linking in with comms and engagement teams across the different councils and meeting regularly with the different teams. So we're kind of getting a picture of what mechanisms we have across the board that we can kind of utilise to get wider engagement going forward. We've also linking in with Consultation Institute, who are a national kind of think tank support organisation, to make sure that we kind of take advantages of any opportunities that we can do to make sure that that engagement kind of improves next time, and actually to make sure that it's not just come June there's this document that people can comment on and contribute to, but actually that everybody's kind of warmed up to the idea that this fits into a whole bigger picture of kind of the view for Greater Manchester going forward.
Does that, please do, Councillor Sherrington.
I'm just aware that on Appendix 3 it's all about the localism, and quite simply, if we are realistically hoping to get 21 people together to make decisions or help with the planning situation, then we really need to actually have a lot more, if we can, involved. Okay, thank you.
And we've got some good examples. I know from my part of the world in Stockport, we've got some neighbourhood planning, some neighbourhood plans that are being worked on. I think there's one that's quite an advanced stage, there's one that's in the middle, and there's one at least towards the beginning in High Lane. So I know that that's being worked on by communities. I'm not saying that's right for all communities, but absolutely for some communities, neighbourhood planning is absolutely the right way that they're approaching it and what they're doing. Any other comments from any members of the committee? Thank you very much indeed, and we very much look forward to, as I'm sure do you, Anne, digging into that in some more depth next time. Right, we are going to jump straight into transport, actually, if that's okay with everybody. The Mayor is planning to join us, but his availability is limited, so he's going to join us at, I'm told, 11:15 is the time he's got. So we're going to do some transport first. This is a really important area that a number of members raised when we were talking about other things, actually. I think we were talking about integration, we were talking about different things and some of the challenges with accessibility. Joining us today are David Dickinson. David leads TFGM's multimodal transport interchanges project teams. That's catchy. So thank you for that. And Rod, who is a familiar face to us around this table. Thank you very much for the papers, the presentation in multicolour that you've provided to us. Would you like to introduce the report or work your way through some of the slides, and then I'm sure members have got lots of questions?
Yeah, we thought we'd just literally do that. There's a lot of slides here. I thought perhaps if David could concentrate on Bolton Interchange, which is within the slide pack, do a very quick run through that, and then we're very open to take questions. So I'll just introduce David Dickinson, Programme Manager. Perhaps an easier way to get his job title across. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Conscious that you've got the slides in the pack, they're very wordy, so I won't spend a lot of time reading through the slides. I will try to canter through, but if I am prattling on, please do tell me to move on to something more exciting. So, can move on past the slide. So a very quick overview of what TFGM does, what Transport for Greater Manchester does, for those who don't know. We own and operate Metrolink, all the bus stations in GM, all the bus stops and shelters in Greater Manchester, and the Lee guided busway and one rail station, the rest of those rail stations being owned and operated by the rail industry. My department's responsible for delivering projects within those asset types and some key themes that threads through, such as quality and active travel and so on and so forth. It is worth just highlighting from this slide, I know it's written in bold at the top there, but nearly 1/5 of people in GM have a long-term disability, and therefore it's obviously a key part of our agenda in delivering transport. So, general, in terms of making travel easier for all, we have step-free access across all of our assets, and we also work very closely with the rail industry in terms of trying to lobby them to get funding to get step-free access across their assets. Worth pointing out that there's only about 44% of the stations in Greater Manchester do have step-free access, so we're working tirelessly with the rail industry to try and improve that. So onto Bolton Interchange. I have a very quick run through a case study of that. So in terms of consultation, we listen to a very wide range of groups, engaging through consultation, through questionnaires, through drop-in sessions, predominantly with the DDRG, the Disability Design Reference Group. And in addition to that, we also, particularly on Bolton, did a large dress rehearsal with over 100 volunteers to actually test the facility, test our staff, before we actually opened it to the public properly. So, along with engaging with the groups, we do employ a separate access consultant to help us work through the feedback and to sort of bench that against what the standards say and what the standards ask. And then we work through with our contractors to actually see that what adds the best benefit is implemented into our schemes. And then again, in terms of lessons learned, we plug this into our design manuals to see that the time actually isn't wasted going forward. So in terms of specific to Bolton, we have induction loops right across the interchange through the concourse and at the ticket offices. We have step-free access to all levels. We have accessible toilets, left and right-handed, and we also have a change in places facility, which is one of only 1,000 in the UK, and it's got facilities such as adjustable height, changing bench, shower, and hoist. Moving on. So in terms of the layout, for those of you who haven't seen the layout, unfortunately, we've not provided you with one in here. The layout of the interchange is effectively in a A shape. If you imagine, if you come through either of the two main entrances, Great Moor Street and Newport Street, you're coming up the legs of the A towards the cross member of the triangle, which is where the ticket office is located, and then up the sides of the A, up to the apex, and these are what we call streets. So what we've done is we've included contrasting lines at these entrance points to guide partially sighted people to the ticket office and down these streets to be able to get to each of the bus stands along the interchange. Then within the centre point of the A, we have our central concourse, which is where the cafe facility is. It's a very busy, vibrant area, and hence the streets trying to keep people with impaired mobility or partially sighted away from the centre concourse unless they physically want to go to that location. So it allows them to be least distracted when they're actually finding their stands. So again, to aid visibility, clarity and movement and avoid confusion, we have contrasting door surrounds. So as a person approaches our main entrance, we have a big white goalpost around our main entrance doors, and we also have those around our bus stand doors also. At the apex of the A, we also have lift access up to the Skylink Bridge to take you across to the rail station, and also to take you to the concourse level, as well as the ramps that we've described before. It's worth pointing out as well, fundamentally, in contrast to Moor Lane, for instance, where you have to cross the bus lanes multiple times to get to from one stop to another, or indeed into the town, the central island shape of the interchange allows you to avoid doing that, and means that you can go from one bus to another in a place of safety. So it's worth highlighting at this point, and this can often be seen as quite controversial, that it needs to be recognised that the needs and wants of different groups do often conflict a lot, and what is considered to be a benefit for one group can often be a very serious disbenefit for others. And this needs very careful consideration, hence we employ the access consultant to help us work through those standards and explain to multiple stakeholders why we can't always take on board all the feedback received. So what we have not included is often as important or more important as what we have included. A couple of points that have been raised by a number of stakeholders is that we don't have contrasting lines all the way around our facility as guidance aids, but the reason behind that is because as you were getting to the rail station, those wouldn't be there. So as one holistic facility, it would be confusing to people who have navigated into the centre of a facility, and then effectively we've dumped them at the rail industry's doors, who don't have the same level of facilities as us. Likewise with tactile guidance paths, a lot of local transport authorities have had to actually take these out because they are known to cause trip hazards for ambulant disabled people, and where people are putting them in, they're often putting them into incorrect dimensions, so that it's some kind of halfway house to offer some kind of middle ground. And also the final point at the bottom there is forming large dark shapes can often be a significant issue for people with dementia as well. So I'll now very quickly rattle through what we've done across other modes. On our rail projects, obviously our influence is more limited than it is on our own assets. So we work where we've got most control, and that has always been through information and security to help the hard of hearing and visually impaired, along with trying to lobby the DFT and rail industry for funding to improve access. So in terms of Metrolink, we engage with the DDRG. Our DDRG, similar process to our interchanges, and we also invite the DDRG along on tram journeys to any new stops before they're open to the public. And just worth pointing out that this has now been recognised by the Human Rights and Equality Commission as a best practice model. So in terms of bus and highways, again, same approach taken on the guided busway, and the DDRG has worked with us across a number of bus stops as samples, affecting effectively 12,500 bus stops in total. So in summary, like I started with, it affects a great number of the public, and we obviously then need to focus that across all of our schemes and work through all the best standards and practice. Thank you for your time. If you've got any questions, I'll be happy to take them if I can.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm sure the committee will have some questions, because this is something that affects all of the 10 boroughs, and as we've seen, 1 in 5 passengers across Greater Manchester. Perhaps if I start, how much easier would it be if we have more control of the rail stations?
I would suggest... I feel like I'm falling into a trap.
No, there's a door that's just been gently put open.
No, I would suggest it would be significantly easier. We have a great deal of influence over our own assets. We spend a lot of time, as I've rattled through there, with members of the public. The DDRG on Bolton Interchange, we met over a period of about 7 years leading up to the completion of that interchange. We don't always get everything right, but we consult and we go back and we look and we try to do the very best we can for people. We can't do that at the rail industry at the moment.
Could I just add a tiny point to that? It's just to recognise that around half of the rail stations in Greater Manchester do not have disabled access. Whilst local control would undoubtedly help us accelerate the rate to which disabled access could be introduced, it would still take a number of years because there are some really major civil engineering challenges, not least at some of the railway stations, so just temper that a little.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Sherrington and then Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chair. All it is, you've put on here all the things that are missing. And I actually sat on the Disability Forum at Bolton, and you came along, I'm not saying you personally, but somebody came along and actually talked to them about things that they'd like to see. And one of them was to do with some way of getting across the bridge, you know, probably with a walkway, moving walkway or something similar to get across that bridge. Now, the problem is that when it's saying that things that are missing, it's not only things that are missing about the bridge. So I would like to have that put on, so it's something that you can probably look at in the future, because the only reason it didn't happen, I have told anyway, I don't know if this is true, was because there wasn't the money for it. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I find it exceedingly difficult for people who have got any form of disability, whether it's angina or something like that, because of the fact that it goes up and down and everything. It's not like a smooth run through to the railway station. However, having said all that, most people I spoke to think it's absolutely wonderful, and they're so pleased to see this in Bolton. But if we could make a note of that, so that it's something that could be looked at in the future, if we do, for instance, get a few bob here and there, and it would be rather nice for the people, because you're never sure how many disabilities you're going to actually finish up with. And it's, you know, saying about 19% now, it could be completely different in a few years' time. Thank you.
Do you want to respond to that, please?
Yeah, I can do. Thank you very much for the compliments on the majority of that. In terms of the Skylink bridge, in terms of ramped access, what we did do is we designed the ramps so that they far surpassed the recommendations of the standards, so they're actually far shallower than the minimum standards recommended by the regulations, and we included landings, hence the sort of the wavy approach as you go up the bridge, so it's ramps and landings, and we included the handrails. Part of the complexity on this scheme, unfortunately, and we would have liked to, because the distance is nearly 100 metres. It's the distance
that's the problem.
Is the height. So we have a rail station that is fixed at a height. We have the railway lines that were in the middle of being electrified, and then we have a fixed height in terms of Great Moor Street, in terms of getting people level access from Great Moor Street into the interchange. So if you imagine, that constrains the height of what the building can be, and obviously we need to be able to pass under that bridge with buses as well. So it gave us so many factors, and the depth of the structure to actually carry a travelator was severely excessive. So we felt we couldn't reasonably technically do it. It was a very significant issue to be able to try and overcome, unfortunately. It wasn't just about the funding of it.
Well, if things move on,
yeah,
you can look at it then,
absolutely,
can't
yeah.
you? You know, because I'm sure
technology's always improving.
I'm sure technology will improve. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I've got questions from Councillor Sharp, Councillor Roberts and Councillor Morgan, and I see Councillor Pearce indicating. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, can I say I didn't have the pleasure of reading any papers before I came here, so I'm beginning to just fashion some of my ideas when I listen to what you're saying. The interchange interests me, and some of the remarks that my colleague over here has in fact mentioned about disabilities. I'm not certain these days as where disabilities starts and ends, because it's growing all the time with different subjects. You've picked up, and quite rightly so, some of the problems like handrails, for example, and I understand that. But there is actually now a growing number of people who have difficulties in getting around. So I go to a subject which I do know a little bit about, and I get a lot of complaints regarding the interchange in Altrincham, which is fairly new. And one of the biggest moans I get is that they have to pay to go to use the toilet. Now, not going into the mechanics of that, the growing population has great needs these days, and sometimes they find it very, very difficult. It's not a question of money, it's getting the change and having the right amount. And I met some people who'd come from abroad, and he was looking for a toilet to go to.
Councillor Sharp, I'm going to encourage you in the direction of a question, please.
Well, it's coming to it, right? Because this is this one subject to illustrate all the others. All I'm saying is that when you do your consultation and you're doing rebuilds again, please consider all the other things under the heading of disabilities, which is now a vast subject. People are unsteady on their feet, so they need rails and things of that nature. So I hope your consultation will, in fact, have regard for those elements if you're redesigning again from start. That's all. I know there's a cost element, and I don't know what income you can take if you make charges, but it's not so easy for some people. That's all, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring in Councillor Roberts as well and then ask you to address both of those. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you. Well, my questions are a bit, some of the sort of the same ground. So what you've told us is that 19% of GM residents have a disability. I wonder, I'm assuming that you know more about transport users. Because is it 19% of transport users have a disability? Is it a higher percentage, a lower percentage? What do you know about the types of disability? And I suppose that the obvious response is, well, some people won't be able to use our public transport because we haven't made it accessible to them. But I'm kind of interested in how much, not that you go through a load of percentages, but how much do you know about users and the barriers that they have that helps to inform some of these design decisions?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And in terms of sheer percentages, it is very similar. So in terms of Bolton transport users specifically, I think it's around 21-22%, so compared to the 19, so it's a slightly higher percentage, but again, it's relatively typical of the general demographic. Covering sort of both questions at once, although that percentage is something we can measure and understand, there are the temporary encumbered people, so it could be expectant mothers, or it could be people with injuries or anything. So that that number can change, and we do consult across multiple demographics, not just those registered disabled, so that we can understand the changes. In terms of toilet provision, nobody who is encumbered through a disability or otherwise has to pay to use the accessible toilets or change in places facilities. That is just the general toilets, and we find that basically the takings from that helps pay for the cleaning of the toilets, and it helps stop misuse, most importantly, and we tend to find we have facilities that people have a high satisfaction rate with, rather than getting in and not being able to use the facilities because they're in such a bad state of repair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. It's just comments really. I completely echo what Elaine said. It's a really quite impressive building, but I find it quite ironic really when we talk about step 3, because one of the things that when you walk into the interchange is the amount of steps there are. And I don't know you're saying about the ramps, but we've had a bit of criticism locally about that initial sort of, because it's on separate levels. I know we're bound by the where it's been built. So that's interesting, obviously because Moor Lane was on a completely flat basis and there was no steps at all. But what it has done, is just a comment, is it really has acted as a catalyst for the regeneration of the whole area there. So, but building the interchange, we've got several developments of Grade A office buildings coming on, so it's been really impressive. And I just say that the perception is there's too many steps, but that's you're never going to please everybody all the time. I understand that, but thank you very much.
Councillor Pearce, please.
Thank you. Yeah, a few points. My first point really is that I was really pleased that you mentioned the design of the sort of the bus interchange particularly, and that you could actually transfer between different buses and bus stops without having to cross multiple lanes. For visually impaired people, that can be an absolute nightmare, and there's not only one winner generally with visually impaired people meeting buses. My second point, but to be totally serious about that, the actual getting the design right on new build facilities and which incorporates access as a fundamental part of that design, it is so much more important than trying to add on later. The second point is you talk about the consultation group, and I think it's very positive. My only slight concern would be that there tends to be a small group of people involved in this sort of thing, mainly because people are not quite sure how to get involved or haven't the training to be able to contribute in a way which is sometimes difficult because the complexity of some of these schemes is quite formidable to many people. So have you got any plans for advertising for additional members, training, offering some sort of training, or sort of I don't know, working something out so that people can be more people can be involved? And my third point was around the integration, and it is really important in terms of if you've got fantastic new designs that work with other partners to integrate those designs into the environment around is really important. Again, disabled people really familiar with the fact that you can have something which is superbly designed, and then next step is I don't know, 5 steps up to the station, or your tactile facilities disappear, and there's nothing to link with the other parts of your environment. So they're my three main points on the presentation.
Thank you very much for those. Do you want to address those two before I bring in 2 final comments from Councillors Robinson and Barnes, please?
Of course, yeah. In terms of the integration piece, we kind of started discussing it before. Interchange meaning multimodal, so in terms of bus and our active travel ends, and as close as we can link it to blend with the rail industry. And we do intend to push as best as we can with the rail industry. And if we do find ourselves taking over more rail stations, we will have greater influence from that point. Sorry, can you possibly just remind me of your second point?
It's on DDRG, if you just explain.
Oh, sorry, yes. Yeah, in terms of the DDRG, this has been a big learning element for us with Bolton specifically, with some of the blind and partially sighted items that were picked up post-completion. And although we did consult a number of people, I think some of the more specialist aspects were missed, and we were able to move quite quickly, sometimes within 48 hours, to actually make amendments and consult with affected individuals. What we've taken from that is we are consulting more heavily with Henshaws and working with them, as well as the RNIB and with the company React, who make the system formerly owned by the RNIB in terms of notifications at bus stands, so that we can, with those groups and others such as dementia, have greater access to a greater audience when we come to consult.
Okay, Councillor Robinson and then Councillor Barnes, and then we'll draw a line, I think.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at where it says that certain things are missing, and you've discussed this about React, a fob-based locator system trialled at Moor Lane, is now being superseded by an app-based solutions. Some clarity on that, please, but also, will that also mean that your key that you use, because I have one, is that going to be defunct in the future, and what will replace that? But also, even with a key fob for the disabled toilet, you still have problems getting in and out because it's not always working. The light doesn't always come on to say whether it's being occupied or not, and it's been embarrassing when I've opened the door and somebody's inside has not locked the door because the lights, you can't see that red or that green. So I'd like some more clarification on what will happen regarding accessing it. Thank you.
And Councillor Barnes, please.
Sorry, my question was about certain things missing as well, but you've more or less just answered it with a partially cited. I was just going to ask about who you would be speaking with about the people living with dementia and their needs.
Thank you.
So just to pick up on the React system first, it's a bit of a hybrid system that React as an organisation adopted from the RNIB. So the fobs are owned by the RNIB, and React picked up the software that allows the fobs to talk to different bus stands. We've met with the managing director of React, and he is working very closely with the RNIB and keeping us updated on the app-based system that they're developing. From initial conversations, I don't think it makes the fobs defunct for those who don't want to use an app-based system. It just brings it all together with more advanced information that helps people not only in bus stations but across towns as well, where fobs wouldn't work particularly well, so it brings it all into one place. Sorry, what was... sorry, in terms of dementia, unfortunately I don't know the group that the team has been working with specifically, but I can feed back to you after the meeting if that's okay.
Please do, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just that I know Salford University have just recently opened a dementia unit, and I don't know whether it would be helpful for you to speak with those as well.
That would be very useful, yeah. If
I can get you a contact for that if you like.
That would be great, thank you.
That was a really useful presentation. Thank you very much indeed for that. It strikes me that we as a committee have an opportunity to do something practical and useful and move this issue forwards. We represent 3 different political parties, and I think we all agree on the need to improve accessibility of our transport infrastructure across the whole of Greater Manchester. And so I'd like to make a proposal that we as a committee write to, I guess it would be the Secretary of State, asking to bring more powers to Greater Manchester in terms of the ownership of some of the infrastructure, in terms of some of the assets. And I wondered how members felt about that and whether that might be something we might agree to.
I'm
Councillor
happy
Wilson.
to second that.
Okay. Does anybody disagree with that proposal? Okay. What I propose then is that Councillor Morgan as our Vice Chair and I, and if the Labour group did want to appoint somebody to sign it off to make sure we're not saying anything outrageous in that letter, I'd be very happy to hear from them. But if we work together on a letter to go to the Secretary of State, I think that might be something really positive that could move this forward. Okay, thank you very much indeed to both of our representatives from TFGM. We have a couple of minutes before the Mayor is due to arrive, and so I propose we have a look at item number 8, which is the work programme. Colleagues will note that we've got the substantive item on GMSF next time, and we've also got the air quality plan, Susan. And then in March, we've got the Green Summit and a waste strategy presentation.
Yes, so that's all scheduled if members are, you know, if there's anything in specifically that members wish to kind of pick up, it's always really helpful because sometimes the subjects are a little bit general. And so if there's, you know, a particular aspect of a policy area that you wish to pick up, please can you advise, because that's helpful to the report authors and the style of the presentation. We're also talking about the meeting in May, and in consultation with the chair, but obviously we're interested in getting committee's views on this, about cancelling May's meeting because of the proximity to elections and getting papers out.
Yeah, just out of interest, it'd be really, if members could indicate if they're up for election this time. Can you raise your hand, please? Okay. Forgive me if I don't wish you well. But, but it's worth noting. We would miss you dearly. No, that's interesting to note, and I think there will be some conversation to be had with the leaders of the 10 boroughs about continuity and about balance within the membership, but that's a conversation for a different time. Councillor Sherrington.
Chair, I just wanted to say that I won't be here next year because I'm going to be busy being mayor in Bolton. So I won't be here. So I was just thinking if you're looking of continuity, it's unfortunately...
You'll be part of the chain, gang. Thank you very much for letting us know, Councillor Sherrington. Are you going to be mayor as well, Councillor Robinson?
Gosh, no. Might have done many years ago, but not now. No, in May, we've just got a new leader who's going to be there in as well next year. But it was a previous leader that nominated me to this committee. The new leader has also asked me to keep on doing this committee. The only thing is I won't be here in May because I'll be away on holiday.
Well, I hope you have a lovely holiday. I think it's possible that none of us will be here in May, but we will let you know at the next meeting. There's a discussion ongoing, partly because it's to do with timings of PERDA, it's to do with timings of when the Combined Authority meets and when we can all be nominated. We are officially all members of this committee until the meeting of the Combined Authority at the end of June, I believe. But there's some discussion to be had about all of that. But we wish you a very pleasant year as Mayor, Councillor Sherrington, and a really nice holiday, Councillor Robinson. OK, I'm joined on my left, your right, by the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, and who is here to talk to us about the Town Centre Challenge. Please feel free to introduce the report. I'm sure the committee will have plenty of questions for you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Morning, everybody. There's been a long-standing and possibly growing concern around Greater Manchester, not just here, all over the country, around town centres and the future of town centres. The Cameron government brought in Mary Portas to conduct a review. That was back in, I think, 2011, and a lot of new thinking came from that. But I suppose the premise that was underlying that approach was that you could revitalise town centres as retail centres, that you could just find new ways of filling the vacant retail space. And while it may have had some limited success, I don't think you could say that it's kind of created a blueprint for the future of town centres, and concern has continued to grow. I mean, I felt this very personally as the MP for Lee for 16 years. Councillor Walker will know these concerns well. There is a real palpable sense of, I don't know, kind of concern, distress about the demise of the town centre. People recall it as a retail centre, also an employment centre, and of course life has changed around it, and it's true of many Greater Manchester towns. The employment that was once there went in the 80s and the 90s, and then in the last 2 decades we've seen both the rise of out of town centre retail parks and more recently online shopping, and all of these factors have had an impact on town centres. And when we consider town centres of Greater Manchester, I'm not just thinking necessarily of the principal town, it's those secondary or tertiary towns that often are the hardest to reach and struggle the most. So I've kind of had a long-standing concern about this, but then on the other side of the debate, we have the whole question around housing growth, and the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework that you've just been hearing about. And it started to become clear to me through the mayoral election campaign, as we were hearing the debate about the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework unfold, that there was a kind of an opportunity here to put these two issues together and to see if we could rethink our approach to town centre regeneration, particularly through the question of housing. And that's the notion, I guess, that is the kind of core proposal that underlies the town centre challenge initiative. Recognising, and this is difficult, and it will be a hard argument with the public in the same way that the debates about Greenbelt are hard with the public, recognising from the beginning that many of our towns in Greater Manchester won't be the retail centres that they once were. I think we have to accept that. And clinging on to some of that old retail space becomes part of the problem, because it gets filled by fast food shops, betting shops, pound shops, charity shops, and that's the kind of narrative that people will talk about when they express their concern about the loss of the sense of civic pride in the town centre. So the premise of this is to say, can we refocus town centres in Greater Manchester? Can we deliver some of our housing growth, the numbers that we know we need to build through town centres, by taking a more interventionist approach to planning and regeneration? Obviously, not just linked to me, but the creation of a mayor generally offers new opportunities to Greater Manchester to take a more front foot approach to planning. The mayor has the ability to establish what are called mayoral development corporations, which bring a range of benefits with regard to planning and boosting the viability of sites. There is possibility of using compulsory purchase powers to clear sites that may have been difficult for a council to take on. We're in discussions at the moment with the government around a housing deal for Greater Manchester, and that may give us access to funds that could help with land remediation. So what's taking shape here is whether or not we can, through these various developments, adopt a new approach where we take a focused look at an individual town and see if then we can kickstart a new approach to transformative housing development. So that's the thinking that lay behind the launch of the Town Centre Challenge last November. And the idea wasn't to impose this on anybody. We wanted to make the offer to all 10 districts to see whether or not they wanted to take part, and if there was a town they wanted to nominate. So we've so far, I think, had 6 confirmed referrals. Berry, I think, about to confirm Prestwich. You have the 6 in the paper. Prestwich is the additional town, which I think has now been confirmed, and we are expecting a referral from both Rochdale and Tameside. Oldham have decided not to nominate. And so from here, the idea is then for me to devote some of my time to these towns, to these places, and to convene an event with public and private landowners, bring all of the landowners in those particular places together into one place, throw it open to private sector developers, our housing providers, anybody actually who might have an interest in the future of that town, galvanise a new discussion about it. And I think if you look at the nominations that we've had, I don't want to show any favouritism, but it's fair to say that Stockport really have been kind of beginning. The council has been doing a lot of work anyway. Eamon, when he was previous chief executive of Stockport, was leading a lot of work around where the council was taking a bit of a risk by kick-starting development in Stockport town centre. So it's already made a bit of progress. It's obvious that Stockport is ready to go, if you like. You know, there's an emerging master plan for the town centre. So the point being, rather than a developer taking an individual risk on an individual project, if you paint the picture of the master plan, it can build confidence in making investments in town centres like Stockport. And by doing that, by bringing everybody together, you know, raise the market, if you like, in the place. So that is the thinking, and it may be that the public may not care very much for seeing town centres redesignated, having land redesignated for retail away from commercial and employment. But I think part of the reality we need to face up to here is that that could be the best way to breathe new life into these towns, because if you build flats or apartments, you might bring in 20-somethings, 30-somethings who will help then stimulate a different kind of economy. Or, interestingly, older people may choose to downsize into town centres, preferring that way of life, if you like, to staying in the family home. So it's about promoting a new concept. I think if you go back 20 years, many people couldn't see much of a market for city centre living, but obviously, you know, that has been transformed in the last 20 years. And the argument now is to say, can we do the same with our town centres? So, Chair, I've given you a kind of a broad brush picture as to what lies behind the town centre challenge. Maybe the last point for me just to emphasise is really around, in the end, coming back in the middle part of this year with a coherent and sustainable planning framework, spatial framework for Greater Manchester. One of my concerns about the first iteration was that if you followed the logic of it, you might have seen the risk of a Greater Manchester with decaying town centres surrounded by urban sprawl and ever more congested roads and poor air quality and everything that flows from it. And what this is trying to do is to kind of go back to developing in our urban, suburban, brownfield areas, critically linking that development to the existing public transport infrastructure, so that we can better absorb the effect of the housing growth. And by doing that, come back later this year with a spatial framework that will still have controversial decisions within it. There's no question about that, but will actually make more sense when it's seen in its totality. So that's the thinking. Obviously, more than happy to take questions on the paper or anything I've said.
Thank you very much. Very quick question from me. What reason did Oldham give for not nominating a town?
Well, Oldham have, like Stockport Council, have been doing a lot of their own work on Oldham Town Centre. So, you know, they felt that they were already, you know, they're very focused on Oldham Town Centre at the moment and have well-developed plans to do it. And they felt that the Town Centre challenge, I think, wouldn't necessarily help them at this stage.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Sherrington and then Councillor Elise Wilson. Councillor Sherrington.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two questions really, but they're both quick. Okay, right. One is, why has Stockport put itself forward as the town centre when everybody else has looked at, instead of their main town centre, they're looking at secondary town centres? And the other one was, when you were saying about compulsory purchase, the compulsory purchase orders are exceedingly difficult to do and they take forever. And I was just wondering, what pressure can we put on the government to actually change the legal system around compulsory purchase so it makes it so much easier for us to deal with the town centres? Because a lot of authorities don't actually own a lot of the land that are in the town centres. So we've got to actually rely on other people in the private sector about what they do with their land. And the thing is that we're up against it every time we try to do it through compulsory purchase, because we've actually got to show what we're going to do. So therefore we've got to get all that in place, and then when we've done all that, if the person doesn't want to do that and they want to do something different, well, it starts all over again. So it can take years to actually solve this problem. So we need to have something that is changing the process as far as compulsory purchase is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shelton. So on Stockport, I mean, it was free for every borough to nominate the town that they wanted to, and it wasn't restricted to. It could be a primary town. We didn't say it couldn't be. I think it's really, I guess, for the reason I gave, because of the considerable work that's gone into Stockport and funding that has been provided from a Greater Manchester level and other funding, it is really ready to go. And I think there was a feeling that from the borough's point of view, it could absorb quite a lot of the housing growth needed, and that was, you know, their reason. I should say, I mean, I'm not ruling out, if we can prove this concept, if we can show that this actually does work, there could be second or third rounds. You know, I'm not, you know, why wouldn't we carry on with it if we can, you know, so this won't be 9 towns and then that's it. You know, that my intention would be, if this is felt to be beneficial, then I'm prepared to consider that we would open up further rounds, and then obviously Stockport will be free to nominate a different place. On CPO, I think you make an absolutely valid point, and I think the history of councils trying to use powers is not a good one, is it? It's quite a fraught picture. Obviously, these are new powers in that they are accruing to mayors for the first time. Now, whether that changes their use, I'm not sure. Often, though, it's the important thing to say, it's not necessarily the use of the powers legally. It can be the threat of the use of the powers that can kind of facilitate the movement that's needed to get a site towards viability. So it definitely will be a case of seeing as we go and scheme by scheme, and they may be more useful in some places than others. And I absolutely would not rule out going back to the government to say we need a regime that favours public authorities when seeking to do this.
Eamon, are you looking to come in on this point?
Yes, just one other point to make, and the points that you make about the barriers to prosecution of CPO are absolutely right, but those apply to the powers available to local authorities under the Town and Country Planning Act. The powers that the mayor has are actually different powers. The CPO, the regeneration CPO powers that were held by English partnerships and subsequently by the HCA. So they are actually capable of being applied in a more broad and slightly more flexible way. It's not to say they're going to be quick, because as you rightly say, CPOs do take time. But I think, as we've already seen, and we've already agreed to use the mayoral powers at a site at Pomona, which straddles Manchester and Trafford across the 2 boroughs, as a means of bringing forward a regeneration of that area. So there's a broader and more flexible application of powers potentially available, but you're quite right to point out whatever way you go down that route, it takes time.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sherrington. Councillor Elise Wilson, and then Councillor James Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions, actually. But firstly, I actually welcome the idea of increasing residential living in the town centres. I think that is a positive step forward. My concerns are about the densities, however, and high density living in town centres. Apart from anything else, we have an issue, say, with parking, right? So if you have a set of flats, or you turn a office block into housing, into flats, where do people park their cars? You're trying to attract people without parking. And if you look at somewhere like Stockport, whilst we have a good rail links, we can suffer somewhat in terms of we don't have Metrolink, for example, and you're trying to build public transport within an area in order to be able to say, well, those residents won't need to have a car because they're going to use the public transport. But we have a weakness in Stockport in terms of public transport. So it's, I don't think we can just increase the number of people living in a town centre and not think about that wider infrastructure and how that's going to balance. I also think that there is also an issue about urban green space, and that whilst you have high density living, it shouldn't be at the expense. Those people living in town centres are also entitled to have green space around them. And the idea that so I think we need to also consider with the Town Centre Challenge how we actually bring that green into our town centres. And then finally, the report doesn't include any timescales whatsoever as to how, when you're envisaging seeing some kind of anything out of this. You know, when do you think that residents are going to feel a difference, and how long are you prepared to put your attention on a particular? When are you going to decide, actually, that's it for Stockport, now we're going to move on to something else? Or, I mean, it could be Stockport, it could be anywhere. I'm saying that because it's a town that's been picked. But any town, when have you decided, oh, I'm going to give so many months to this, and then I'm going to walk away? So timescales in not only when are residents going to feel the difference in each of these areas, and then also how are you going to make the decision that your time's up there, you've spent enough time?
Councillor Wilson, so let me take those issues in turn. So I agree with you around density. There are issues there, fire safety, a whole range of issues that flow from that, as you say, parking, and can infrastructure deal with it. Those obviously will be issues for the planning process, wouldn't they, at local authority level. Part of what I'm saying here is that it is about removing maybe some old buildings that aren't, you know, so it's not about necessarily just adding to what's going on. It is possibly about taking existing capacity away. But I agree with you. It might mean that public transport facilities need to be enhanced to support development, and contributions therefore would have to be captured to improve public transport if we're to sustain extra development. Or we have been given around £250 million through the Transforming Cities fund in the budget. I've said that we want to earmark a significant proportion of that towards cycling. So it seems to me that the town centre initiative would have to piggyback on other things that we're doing as well to put in that infrastructure that will support the developments that you're saying. The whole point here is that we don't just proceed development by development. You know, it's about a master plan for a town centre. You know, it's about looking across the whole, you know, shrinking the retail core possibly, you know, looking at how the, you know, giving some logic to the town. If I think of Lee, no one's really done that for well, 100 years possibly. You know, it's kind of the town has just kind of changed, but it's a bit piecemeal and it doesn't really make sense anymore. The civic quarter is kind of not as clearly identified. You know, it needs a master plan really to give it some kind of new coherence. And I think that's true of a lot of Greater Manchester towns. So that master planning exercise would obviously deal with some of the issues that you're raising. Agree about the green space. I mean, I can think now of Lee, of a building that I've always just wanted to kind of take down completely, and if it could be put into green space, benches, whatever, that you would open up some of these towns if you were to think about that. So it's how do you both build but also add value to, you know, make it a more attractive place to be, and that's exactly. And we've got the Urban Pioneer funding that we've been given. You know, there may be other pots that we can kind of chip into to add some of that green space. There's the City of Trees initiative. So it's how do we link the town centre challenge to those other things that are going on, to also, you know, that's the whole point really, to kind of get all policy initiatives pulling in the same direction. On timescales, well, the intention is to start these meetings next month. So it's going to happen quite quickly, and we want a direct result for June for the spatial framework. So before the residents notice anything, we want to notice something on paper, which is confidence that town centres can take more of the housing growth than perhaps was envisaged before. So that's the first output that I'd be looking for from the process. But this could happen quickly. I mean, it's not about, you know, we're not talking years down the line. If the confidence is there around a town, there's no reason why, obviously, development can't start to happen. When will I know that I've kind of given what I need to do? Well, obviously, I can't stay engaged with just one town ongoing, but clearly there is a role for me at the moment. So let's come back to, say, Stockport. Network Rail, for instance, are a large landowner in Stockport, and much of that land could be used for housing delivery. So it feels to me I have got a role here in bringing those people to the table to say, you know, facilitate use of this land, you know, and get that agreement and that buy-in from the different public and private bodies to make land available to support the development. Or it could be that we have private sector organisations land banking and sitting on land that they're not doing anything with, and it's about trying to unlock it. So it's a bit, let's see how it goes, and I don't wish that to sound vague, but you know what I mean, each town might present different issues. I will stay engaged, and I mean, I will stay engaged as long as I can add value to the process, but the point is to try and get some momentum going so that then it can be picked up by the council and the developers. So that's the thinking.
It's exactly why the reason I asked is exactly what you've said, is that it isn't simply a matter of focusing on Stockport and delivering for Stockport, but actually we want to deliver across Greater Manchester. It has to be something that, if it's successful, then we've got to be able to continue. And there are plenty of other parts of Greater Manchester that require the focus and the support. So it is a matter of finding that balance that, yes, you're committed now, when, you know, knowing when you're going to decide, actually, I've done as much as I can do here, and I accept that each town might be different, but making sure that actually there's the momentum to take that through across Greater Manchester, and I think that's important. I
agree. I mean, I think I would envisage at least 2 meetings per town, so a kind of initial meeting to get the conversation going, then a follow-up meeting, and, you know, I will then use my offices to unlock any barriers that may emerge, or to encourage land release. So, you know, it'll be a case of a couple of meetings at least, ongoing development from the team here to help unlock any issues that there might be. But as I said, I'd like to get into a round 2 and a round 3. I stood on an election promise to ensure that all of Greater Manchester was feeling part of the future and could see the growth and could feel that they were moving forward. And the Town Centre Challenge is part of delivering that manifesto commitment.
Okay. I've got Councillor Wilson and Councillor Roberts, but Mr Mayor, when do you think it would be appropriate for you to come back, or for somebody to come back and report back on what's happened in stage 1 of this and what it's delivered? When should we invite you back?
That's a good question, Chair. I mean, I think by April, May, we will know whether the first round of meeting, you know, we'll begin to have a picture of whether this is, and the councils by then will say whether they feel it's adding any value to what they're trying to do. So I guess May, because that will be in advance of the next iteration of the spatial framework. So that will be a good time to give you an update. It will give me a chance to do all of these initial meetings.
Okay. Thank you. We may extend an invitation in June, because there's a discussion about whether a May meeting exists, but we'll work on that, and thank you very much. Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Roberts, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this sounds very exciting on paper, and I think the idea of having a realistic approach rather than an approach driven by some sort of nostalgic view of what a town centre, based on past glories, really. I think having a vision on what town centres would look like in the 21st century is something which I don't think has really been done before. A question follows on from something that Councillor Sherrington said. Since we've got quite a mix, we talk about Stockport, and obviously that's the one that jumps out at you. But lots of the boroughs have nominated either what you probably call secondary town centres, and or in some cases might be better described as district centres. So I just wondered how that interplayed with the strategy, and I guess how doing that could complement what's going on in the main town centres of the district, I guess. Have you had any thoughts on that?
Thanks for the broad welcome. I mean, I genuinely feel it's long overdue. Actually, you know, there's a sense of neglect, isn't there, about some of our towns, and this is an attempt to, as I say, in answer to Councillor Sherrington, to breathe new life into them. It might be that the homes we're building are maybe more attractive for 20-something, 30-somethings, and if that demographic did move into our towns, you then can imagine that a different economy follows them, and that's the idea, isn't it? You know, that you bring a nighttime economy, a kind of restaurants, leisure, whatever it might be, and that will help the town in question make the transition. They are a mixture, you're right. There's a principal town there, there's a couple of secondary towns, and as you say, you could say Withington or Stretford, you could maybe say more a district centre, as you said. I think what will be interesting will be to see how the different issues maybe that arise in different places. Some, I imagine, the viability issues will be much less challenging, and we're all talking about Stockport. I think that will be the one, possibly Stretford. You know, there will be places where the gap for private sector developers will be much smaller, and it might take much less to tip them over the line and to make those work. But if you look at, say, Lee or Farnworth, there it might be that we talk to our housing providers across Greater Manchester, so that we maybe look to see if we can come up with innovative schemes where we help make land available to them and then build more homes for social rent. I think in all places you'd like ideally a mix of that, a bit of both. But obviously certain places will lend themselves more to a certain way of working. And I mean, I think it will, in terms of the effect on the overall borough concerned, my hope is that it will bring a greater sense of balance and also pick up some of those difficult political issues that we're all aware of in any borough, where you get a narrative that says, oh, X place gets everything and we get nothing. I mean, we've all heard it, haven't we? You know, it's a Fred nodding there. But you do hear it. And it's not entirely without, you know, obviously councils in an era of limited resources have had to kind of go for one town and do their best with one town, and they haven't been able to get all around. But, you know, here's where the arrival of a mayor and a combined authority hopefully can add some value, where we put some extra kind of effort behind efforts to reach those more difficult places to generate. So, and my hope is that will then lead to a sense of balance within individual boroughs, and hopefully a healthier kind of political climate within them as well. So maybe they're very, very high ambitions for this scheme, and you know, maybe I'm setting myself up there, but still I think it's worth a go. You know, that the vision of the Greater Manchester strategy was no person, no place left behind, and we've got to find some way of making that feel real to people. And my appeal as we go into this, the detailed meetings of the Town Centre Challenge, is to everybody. You know, if you're in, let's say, Farnworth, or if you're in Swinton, it's probably the best chance that's coming for a while to get some real, you know, focus and some real oomph behind efforts to move it forward. So the best thing is people don't sort of cynically sit back and think, oh, I wonder if that will amount to anything. The best thing is obviously for these places to really go for it themselves and you know, bring as many players as they can to the table. We've already got private developers coming to us, telling us that they are interested about some of these places, that they can see the potential. So there are grounds to be optimistic about what this might achieve.
healthier political climate. Goodness me, Mr Mayor's racy talk. I've got Councillor Roberts and then Councillor Walker. I will bring you in briefly, but I'm going to draw a line because the Mayor needs to leave. So Councillor Roberts, you'd indicated.
Thank you. I'm not sure I can kind of contribute much, given that we've opted out in Oldham. But I suppose one of the, just to note, I think, that we're also in Oldham have full implementation of universal credit. And the kind of ongoing sapping impact of people's spending power being reduced by the continuing, impact of those kinds of policies does, when you're kind of looking at regeneration things more widely, it's difficult when what's already a poor town is made poorer by those kinds of policies. So what I was interested in was your remark that you made in your presentation around the housing deal with government and possible money for land remediation. And that is of interest to me, both in my ward and in the borough, around our ability to redevelop some of our mill sites. So I just wondered if you would be in a position to say anything more about that, and if that was something that was a wider, would hopefully be a wider offer than just the focus on these town centres.
I'll bring Councillor Walker's comment or question in and then ask you to wrap up, please. Go ahead, Councillor Walker.
Yeah, I do think, because I think the concept's absolutely right, and actually the way it's been described today, one of the problems is that there's a danger that it'll come over as just a way of shoving town, new housing out of greenfield sites and into town centres. And I don't want it to be that. I want it to be about regeneration of towns. And that concept, and I'll use probably the wrong word, but that sort of yuppie concept has got a really big appeal to a lot of areas around our conurbation. And people can see that as a future, and they can see that some of our rundown areas have got, absolute potential for this. And all I'm very keen on is that when we're selling it as a concept out in the individual towns, and obviously my first interest will be about Lee, but that's by the way, is that we're selling it not as just a way of filling up the town centre with flats and accommodation, but making it a really good place to live where people would naturally want to be. We've got some opportunities in Lee, to be honest. The guided busway has opened up some opportunities for us in Lee. People from outside the area, partly because our housing costs are a lot lower than, for instance, the Didsburys or even the Withingtons of this world. So people are looking at that anyway. But I want them to get the impression that they would be coming to a great little town rather than coming to a massive housing development. Yep. And so this is an image thing. It's not about the concept, but I just think it's really important that we keep that image that actually, yeah, I want to come and live there because that's the future. That's the sort of area I want to live, and not, that's all those fringe shops that are slowly closing down and being poor conversions into something else. As I say, I do think that image is massive on this concept.
Thank you. Well, those are two really important points to end on, and let me just take them both in turn. So the question of remediation, this has held us back, hasn't it, for many years. Many of the towns that we're talking about are former industrial towns. They have sites that are highly contaminated, and that is part of the viability challenge that they face, because the cost of cleaning that land then means that private development doesn't work. So, this question is critical for us, and Eamon and the team have been in discussions with DCLG officials. If anyone wants to add anything to what I'm saying, he will do, around an element of flexibility for us with regard to funding, so that we can put, if we need to put more money into remediation, that then we can do that. So you know that's very, very much part of our thinking. So that's part of the housing deal. But just something I haven't mentioned that I think is important to mention, because this isn't all just goodwill and a bit of influence and me just trying to twist arms. There is the Greater Manchester Housing Fund that has principally been funding large schemes in the city centre, and people have asked questions about that. You know, why is it just funding schemes in the city centre? This is where the full logic of that policy might now become clearer to people, if I could put it that way, because the money has been, the 300 million we were given has largely been allocated in loans, but those loans are now coming back in, and we've created a bit of a war chest, if you like, here, kind of through the work of people to get those schemes agreed. And that money, as it comes back in, can actually be reallocated to some of these town centres and can support some of the development that we're looking at. Maybe slightly riskier investment than in the city centre. But the example of Stockport actually makes the point that I think every district needs to take on board, which is if the council shows some confidence in its own place, in its own town, that can make the market, if you like, that can begin to turn the place around, and you know it can be the crucial investment that builds investor confidence. So there is potential funding here. This isn't just a kind of, as I say, an exercise that's all about influence, and so it doesn't matter that Oldham at this stage want to focus on delivering what's already going on with Oldham Town Centre. What matters is if the evidence shows that this begins to work, then a round 2 would be open to Oldham. So we will kind of keep an open mind about that. And Fred, on your point, I think this goes to the heart of what's wrong with the housing debate, because it has been about numbers and not about building communities or livable places. That's the problem with it. It's always about X thousand new homes, and there's always a sense that they're just going to be thrown up, wherever, and the numbers are what matters, nothing else matters. And I think that's the kind of limitations of that have kind of been felt, really, and if we're honest, were felt through the first draft of the Greater Manchester Spatial Framework, and the public were saying we need something better, something that is about attractive places to live, as you're rightly saying. So, for me, this is about saying in some places there's quite an unattractive retail estate, isn't there? It is about saying, well, look, shrink that back to a more quality core, and then open up what was formerly retail or employment land for the housing development. But make that attract. I'm not saying go low grade and throw it up pilot high and all the rest of it. I'm saying link that to cycling, the cycling funding that might be available. Or when we have one of these meetings, get the Heritage Lottery Fund down, or get other funders who might add something as well, or the councils as well, maybe put some of their own capital funding in, as Wigan are doing with Lee at the moment. So it is about attractive places to live, absolutely. But it is also about maximising the investment that Transport for Greater Manchester have already put in. There's a mill scheme in Lee, isn't there, that has been well, I think it's near completion, isn't it? On the back of the guided busway, which a mill that's been derelict for 30 years or more. So there is evidence that this can work, and I'll be open-minded. I think I said this to Councillor Wilson before. If some judicious public transport investment might help as well, with regard to a new Metrolink stop here, or a new bus station there.
Very excited.
Then that can be that can be considered as part of it as well. So, yeah, well, it's one of those, isn't it, where it's maybe I'll end up with egg on my face, and maybe it won't work, and maybe they'll say, well, what a waste of time that was. But I feel it's worth a go, because the concern I pick up from people who live in some of our more forgotten towns is pretty real. And they want to see someone taking a care for those places and trying to sketch out a future. And even if the investment doesn't come within a year or 2 years, at least if it ends up with a master plan that's there, should things turn around, or that itself will be would be valuable. So we'll have to see how it goes, but I'll be more than happy, Chair, to come back in May or June to give you a report on what the first round has achieved.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. That's your second meeting with us on the run. I don't believe you're joining us in February. Thank you very much for that, and thank you very much to members for their contribution. Before you leave, I would just like to gently remind you that a briefing note is due to us about the Strategic Transport Board, because you mentioned last time you came some of the details needed fleshing out a little, and we'd love to hear about that. So just a gentle reminder of that.
I will make sure that's
last item on our agenda, colleagues, is the date and time of the next meeting. We are meeting in February, so if those of you who are just looking at your agendas can see the March date, we are actually meeting on the 15th of February at 6 p.m, and that's not here, that's at the Fire Training Centre, is that right, Jen? Yeah. So that's an exciting trip out for some of us. Jen will guide us to where we're supposed to be. I'll draw this meeting to a close. Thank you very much, everybody.